Our first speaker in Wild Metropolis. Very excited about this next speaker. Sometimes people actually, they ask me who my conservation heroes are, and they are Aldo Leopold and Muir and all those people. But from a local standpoint, this is one of my heroes, one of the people that inspire me, get me up in the morning, get projects done. His name is David Renninger, and David is the facilities project manager at MD Anderson Cancer Center, where his primary role is to design and manage the gardens and public green spaces at the 254-acre Houston campus. David leads the way in creating healthy and sustainable landscapes, not only for the environment, but for the people that interact with it. He integrates the evidence-based benefits of nature in hospital settings with sustainable and low-impact site development to create unique outcomes in the healthcare landscape. He is known for his novel outreach programs, such as Parkscriptions Under Nature, to improve quality of life for patients, visitors, and staff. From this perspective, David advocates for nature, and the exterior environment should be part of our public health infrastructure. One of the most exciting parts of this conference is what's going to happen tomorrow with David taking a leading role, working with Ashakura Robinson and Sherwood Design Engineers and several other people on a revisioning of part of the MD Anderson campus. And what they're going to try to do is something very novel. They're going to try to design a place that is great for meeting, great for walking, great for biking, great for transit, great for biodiversity, not just greenery and putting up random trees, but really taking care of that biodiverse community and having food as an aspect of that as well. That's holistic design. That's designing for the whole community, not just humans, but also our wild neighbors. So that's very exciting. With that, David's going to tell you the story of the return of the natives to MD Anderson Cancer Center's campus. Thank you, David.
We're good. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a really big honor for me to be here today. I have some very tough acts to follow. So first thing, I am from MD Anderson, but I am not a doctor, so please don't tell me your medical problems. Whatever you do, don't show me, okay? All right. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek behind the curtain today about how we use nature at MD Anderson to benefit human health, but also environmental health. And a lot of this content will really resonate with you. We've been hearing a lot about the same thing today. So I have to say, Jaime gave me a nice introduction, but many of you in this audience have influenced the outcomes of what we're about to look at today. So let me jump right into it. Okay, so this isn't about MD Anderson per se, but you need to know that it's an amazing place dedicated to cancer prevention, or cancer treatment, research, education, prevention, and survivorship. And a few quick facts about MD Anderson. 127,000 patients annually, 20,000 employees, a 254-acre footprint, we heard that. But this is interesting to me, that the economic impact of MD Anderson represents 2% of the Houston economy. Okay, so if you've never been to MD Anderson, this is what we're looking at. It's a very hyper-urban environment, right? So that's downtown Houston to the north. But once you get between the buildings, you start to see this, these greenways and these corridors. And then upon closer inspection, you'll see places like this. This is our chrysalis garden. It's one of our patient care gardens. And you also see a lot of places like this. This is a prairie restoration, which I'm going to speak about extensively today. All right, so a little bit about myself. Jaime touched on that. I have a background in landscape design, in maintenance, a degree in horticulture. You know what my role is at MD Anderson: landscape design, maintenance, construction, and utilization. I'm really interested in the U word, how we utilize nature to improve outcomes for our patients, visitors, and staff. Okay, and I describe myself as a recovering landscaper. So with this horticulture degree, I've been in the landscape industry my entire life, having started and sold several design build maintenance companies, but I was very unsustainable, and I was very conventional in my practices and very unsustainable at that, meaning I was quick to use chemical pesticides to solve a lot of problems. And I've since made the transition away from being a conventional landscaper to a sustainable landscaper. I'm still a landscaper, no matter how you look at it. So a couple things that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share with you a little insights to the role of nature in hospital settings, okay? I'm going to speak to health and the environment. This kind of tells you why we do some of the things that we do at MD Anderson. And I'm going to talk about ecosystem restoration, a process that we call rewilding. We're going to look at that. And I'm going to share with you the benefits of urban prairies. So one of the ecosystem that we spend a lot of time restoring is the Gulf Coast prairie. Okay, so let's look at this, the role of nature in hospital settings. Now, when I came to MD Anderson and started 6 years ago, and I started to tell people what my new role was going to be, I was met with some surprising responses, tears and hugs and thank yous, and it was it really caught me off guard at first. But what quickly became apparent was that the gardens at MD Anderson elicit some very powerful emotional responses from people. And I wanted to understand more. What was the mechanism behind this, and why was this so? So I began a journey. And along this journey of research, I discovered Dr. Roger S. Ulrich. And now a lot of you in this room may have heard of him. He's a pioneer of evidence-based design, specifically in healthcare settings. But let me show you why some of his studies have been significant. So you may not have heard of him specifically, but most people in this room have heard of one of his groundbreaking studies. So in 1984, he documented the post-operative recovery of 2 sets of hospital patients who underwent the exact same procedure. And it was a gallbladder removal procedure. All things being equal, they had the exact same nursing staff, exact same doctors, the exact same recovery room, same layout. The only thing that was different was the view that they had from the window in the recovery room. So one set had a view of a brick wall, the other set had a view of deciduous trees, nature. So how do you think that their recoveries differed from one another? We know where I'm going with this, right? So the group that had the view of deciduous trees, nature, experienced shorter recovery periods, required less pain medication, they had more positive attitudes, they had fewer complications, and less anxiety. Now, if you're a hospital administrator, you'll want to know that they also had higher patient satisfaction, higher satisfaction with regard to the healthcare provider. So that's a big deal. So when I heard this, understanding my new role, this was some great ammunition. This was a great battle cry for me to start to work with. All right. Well, it turns out that improved clinical outcomes are not the only benefits of interacting with nature in hospital settings. There's a lot of other benefits. There's physical benefits, physiological benefits, and a lot of mental health and wellness benefits as well. Now, we're not really going to dive into this much, but they exist. One of the most fascinating things that I learned was that all of this occurs passively. Even if you're not aware of it, your body responds positively to having exposure to nature. That, again, is a whole nother lecture. We don't really understand why that is, but it just happens. So because of the evidence that's been collected over the years, there's all sorts of there's a lot of resources out there available. To the degree that you can go to the store and buy a book now, or buy several books that's based on some of this evidence. So here's one called Therapeutic Landscapes. This is by my friend Naomi Sachs from Texas A&M. And because of all the evidence that has accumulated over the year, it's safe to say now that nature is an undeniable part of our public health infrastructure. And that's how we view the gardens in the natural settings around MD Anderson. Okay, so there are some ways. I mentioned that a lot of these effects are passive, but there are some ways that we are very active about interacting with our patients and using nature as an intervention. So I wanted to go through a couple of them real quick before we get into the other content here. So one is the Healthy Living Garden. We love gardening at MD Anderson because it represents so many positive things. You've got health and nutrition. You've got cancer prevention, there's the physical activity benefits, of course there's mental health and wellness benefits of gardening. So it's a really great activity, a really great interactive garden there. And we use it in cooking classes. The produce goes to cooking classes, and we have gardening classes with patients 4 times a year. It's really great. Another one is our Pathways to Wellness program. This is still emerging, but we're about to pull the trigger on it. And this is akin to nature prescriptions. You guys have heard of doctors prescribing nature to patients? Well, that's because they know that interacting with nature, spending time outdoors, can improve health outcomes. So that's what we're looking at doing here. We're combining walking with nature interactive for that synergy. Prairies and pediatrics. This is another great way that we're using nature to improve quality of life for our patients, except these are the pediatrics, the Children's Cancer Hospital. So I'm proud to offer this with some of our partners, the Katy Prairie Conservancy and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're going to be providing virtual field trips and other content to them. I think they've already piloted some of the technology recently, so this is really great. And then the last thing, last but not least, is a volunteer rose program. So it's a legacy program where volunteers cut and deliver roses to hospital patients. And the last bullet here says that it's safe for patients. So what I mean by that, and this is a good segue to my next point, is that when those roses are delivered to the patients, they are guaranteed to be free of pesticides and other harmful chemicals like fungicides. Okay, and that's because human health and environmental health are inextricably connected. I'm going to give you a couple examples of why that's so. So one of the benefits of working at MD Anderson is you're exposed to the research. And there's a lot of research out there that links the chronic exposure of chemicals in the environment to the occurrence of diseases like cancer. So, you've heard this all your life, but now I have the opportunity to really validate this. In fact, a lot of this information is public. It's out there. You just need to look for it. So to my horror, a lot of the lawn and garden chemicals that I've used in my past, remember I'm a landscaper, and that my former industry continues to use, and that you guys use in your lawns, and that campuses use on their grounds. Some of these chemicals are powerful endocrine disruptors and actually link to certain types of cancer. Your endocrine system is your glandular system, like thyroid, pancreas, and so forth. So here's number 2 and number 3 from the Environmental Working Group, Dirty Dozen Endocrine Disrupting List. Atrazine, that's a broadleaf herbicide. What is atrazine also sold as? Let's hear it. No, it's weed and feed. You guys have heard of weed and feed? So how many of you or your parents or your neighbors, every spring they go out and it's time to put weed and feed down, and this year you're going to give it a double shot because you've got extra weeds. So that's what they're putting down that's what you're putting down on your lawn, a very powerful endocrine disruptor. Same thing with organophosphate pesticides. This is a huge class of pesticides. Okay, targets the nervous system of insects. Not all insects are pests, are they? Is our monarch butterfly a pest? Are beneficial pollinators pests? No. So this really struck home with me. I learned that Nazi Germany used organophosphates. They called it nerve gas. It's the exact same mode of action. Okay, how many live on a street like this? Okay, lots of us, right? Okay, so where I'm going with this is I had this epiphany as a landscaper. I realized all of a sudden that the idyllic image of your American lawn with this green grass and these bright flowers, it's really built on a fallacy that the irony is that it's one of the most toxic environments you can set foot in. So here's this little dog sitting in that grass. He's absorbing all of those chemicals into his bloodstream. So are you when you walk across your lawn barefoot to check your mail or sit and have a picnic. I would never have a picnic in the average American lawn because of that reason. In fact, if you're going to have a picnic in a lawn, this is where you want to sit. You want to look for the weeds because that tells you you don't have atrazine out there in the yard for starters, right? And by the way, dandelions are delicious and edible. So really all you need for weed control is a fork and some salad dressing, right? Okay, so here's another example. This is a map of Harris County. Okay, can you guys hear me if I step away? It sounds different to me up here. So anyway, so this is a map of Harris County showing all of our waterways. Now the red lines are contaminated waterways. And I forget the percentage, but it's the majority of our waterways in Harris County are contaminated for higher than normal levels of some sort of contaminant. The number one contaminant in our waterways is E. coli bacteria, and it comes from dog feces. Okay, so does it rain here? Yes. Does it flood? Yes. Do we overwater? Yes. So when all that water washes from our lawns, from our impervious surfaces into our storm drains, it carries all these chemicals and it contaminates our waterways. Well, guess what else is in there? It's these guys again. So not only are they powerful endocrine disrupting chemicals, they wreak ecological havoc. So atrazine causes feminization in male frogs, male amphibians. Have you guys ever seen a human embryo and a frog, an amphibian embryo side by side? Well, it's very hard to tell the difference. They both have gills and little tails. So if the atrazine will cause this to frogs, what will it do to human embryos? Well, we don't know because we don't do that type of science. And again, the organophosphate pesticides, these get into our watersheds. This is one of many classes of insecticides linked to colony collapse disorder, neonicotinoids, that's the main one, but it's nasty stuff. Okay, so, long story short, I've learned through this journey that conventional landscaping practices are damaging not only to our own health, but ecological and environmental health as well. So that kind of lays the foundation for this new value proposition. In the past, it was about, for me as a landscaper, it was about curb appeal and increasing property values and making one property look better than the other. But we've learned that's kind of built on an empty shell. It's a fallacy. So I propose this, that all of our products and services, everything that we do together in this room, what we do at MD Anderson, has to benefit human health and wellness. For us, that's our patients, visitors, and staff. It has to benefit ecological and environmental health. Okay, that's how we manage our sustainable campus grounds. And there has to be an economic return on investment. So this, by the way, is the model for sustainability. And we've heard this, and we've been talking about this all day. It's just been repeated in different forms. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about ecosystem restoration and what we're doing at MD Anderson. And it's a process that we call rewilding. And there's really 4 components to it. And we're going to go through this. So number 1 is to connect people with nature. Now we've been talking about that, and that's what we've been doing here all morning, and we've already seen some examples of how we connect our patients and visitors with nature at MD Anderson. So we have those interventions that I went through, like the gardening and the Pathways to Wellness prescription program. All right, but you guys do it as well. Is teaching gardening skills to elementary school kids? Is that connecting people with nature? Sure. Here we are working with some employees at MD Anderson. Some of the 20,000 employees, teaching them about prairies. So that's connecting them with the prairie. Okay. Also with the public. The prairies and some of our activities on campus have been wonderful ways to reach out to the public and help start shaping public opinion, okay? So the second pillar is to restore a native ecosystem, and it needs to be appropriate to your region. So am I going to try to restore the Texas Hill Country in the Texas Medical Center? No. Have I tried to do that in the past as a landscaper in East Texas? Yes. And did it fail? Yes. So you need to maintain the cultural, historical, and geographic accuracy here. You need to understand the ecology a little bit, okay? And consider maintenance and public perception. So the example that I'm using today is the prairie restoration. So is that a weed patch, or is it a wonderfully alive and biodiverse ecosystem? So it's all about your perception, really. So let's go back in time here. This is from 1870, showing cattlemen on the Gulf Coast prairie. This is Galveston Island. And if you're not familiar with the role that the cattle industry has played in Texas history, you might not be from Texas. That's okay. But the prairies provided a seemingly infinite buffet of grazeland for cattle, and to the degree that some of these grass species were almost grazed to extinction. Okay. Here's another picture. This is from Katy, Texas. Katy is on the prairie, is it not? So the Katy Prairie is just a subset of the Gulf Coast prairie ecosystem. But we've already heard that prairies are extremely fertile farmland, so it attracted development. Plus, you didn't have to clear trees to build on it, right? Okay, we've talked about this a little bit as well today. This is from 1944, aerial imagery showing the topography of a prairie. So one of the things that we learned when we were gearing up for our first restoration was that prairies were not flat. They had hills and mounds. Okay, these little hills or mima mounds are like micro sand dunes. They have different soil types. The low parts are called potholes. They are seasonal or ephemeral wetlands, and they will retain water anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. And that these small wetlands coalesced into larger wetlands that once filtered fresh water flowing to the Gulf of Mexico. We heard that today as well. So interestingly, if you look right here, you'll see that watershed draining to the southeast. This is actually in Deer Park, I believe. Let's see here. Yep, so there's that area today. Okay, but look at this tree right here. You guys see that? Let me go back one slide. Okay, you see that tree right there? There it is. Okay, so this picture is recent. This is actually the Deer Park Prairie. If you guys have never been there, you should. It's a prairie remnant, so less than 1% of the original Gulf Coast ecosystem remains intact, and we call those prairie remnants. So we went there. We wanted to see what it was like. If we were going to do the same thing, we wanted to know what we were getting into. So It was an amazing place. I'm from East Texas. I grew up in the East Texas piney woods. That's my landscape. I've never been exposed to prairies before, and when the first time I saw it from 100 yards away, I knew it was a very special place. Okay, so here's another picture. It's very neat. So at this time, we were gearing up to build our first prairie, and the Deer Park Prairie was not saved. So one of the intentions was to harvest seed from there and utilize it on the campus at MD Anderson to propagate these species. Okay, so here's our first site. This is a 2-acre prairie site. All of these little cells up here add up to 2 acres. And we went through a process to collect seeds and so forth. And by the first spring, this is what we were looking at. Okay, and this is just a few weeks ago, I think. You can see the goldenrods there. So it's been a wonderful journey to watch all of the different plants emerge. There's a constant succession of plants. Something's always blooming. It's really neat. So that's establishing the ecosystem, which is really focusing on the native plants more than anything. So the third component to this is to create a wildlife refuge. With the native plants come the wildlife. Okay, so why do we want wildlife at MD Anderson Cancer Center in the middle of the Texas Medical Center? Well, here's why. First, wildlife diversity is an indicator of a healthy ecosystem. And a healthy ecosystem is safe for our patients and visitors and staff. That means if we're looking at abundant wildlife, mostly invertebrates, butterflies, insects, and so forth, that's a great indicator that we're not using the toxic pesticides and fungicides and other chemicals out there on that landscape. But more interestingly, some of the evidence that we've uncovered is that, and this is through research, that viewing wildlife is linked to increased compassion and improved relationships. And these are important feelings to recognize in a hospital setting when where patients in the gardens are often under duress or a lot of stress. So here's some of our creepy crawlies, right? Not so creepy after all. Lots of invertebrates. Our monarch butterfly, from the chrysalis gardens, where you can witness the entire life cycle. Okay, there's more. So we've documented 37 species of native bees out there, 11 species of orthopterans, crickets, katydids, and grasshoppers, and there's more. People are out there all the time surveying for different types of wildlife. Okay, so I wanted to go off on a little tangent here and give you a good reason why it's important to continue to propagate native plants. So this guy, Renninger yuccifolium, it's called a rattlesnake master. Have you guys ever seen this plant before? Of course you guys have, because you're in the know, but I never saw this plant before in my life. My degree's in horticulture, and I've never seen this plant before in my life. So come to find out that it's a prairie obligate. If you find this plant, you're probably looking at a prairie remnant, and it only occurs on these remnants unless people like us intentionally propagate them and plant them in our own restoration sites or our own landscapes. So I learned that this plant supports up to 200 species of invertebrates. So how many species of invertebrates does your Japanese ligustrum or some other imported plant support? Well, the answer is probably 0. Yeah, you can probably count them on one hand here, single digit. So unless native plants in general are propagated by us, as nature disappears over our lifetime and our children's lifetime and so forth, these plants are going to disappear, and so are all the insects that depend on them, that have co-evolved with them for thousands of years, if not longer. And then what happens when the insects are gone? Well, you start to put pressure on the birds that feed on them. So here's a little example that I like to share. This is a chickadee, all right? So do you guys have bird feeders? Some? Okay, what do you put in a bird feeder? You put bird seed, right? So that attracts the songbirds. But I've learned from Douglas Tallamy that 95% of our North American terrestrial songbirds, when they're rearing their young, they don't want your seeds, they want protein. And where do they get the protein from? From the insects. And where are the insects? On the native plants, not your Japanese ligustrums. So there's this interconnection that's very critical. So the question is, how many caterpillars does this little chickadee need to fledge its clutch? And the chickadee might weigh as much as 2.5 pennies, I think. So let's hear a guess. 50, okay. In the interest of time, it's 6,000 to 10,000 caterpillars to fledge a clutch of chickadees, which barely has any mass or weight to them. Okay, that's a caterpillar every minute from sun up to sundown, all day long, every day. That's a noble job. So this is when I started to understand this and how important it is to have native plants. That really gave me some fuel to the fire, and it really helped me commit all of my resources and energy to making this prairie a success. I did not want it to fail and have to remove it a year or two later after installation. Okay, so part of the reason for rewilding and having that term is to increase the biodiversity of the site. So we learned that the prairies were not flat. A later evolution of our first pocket prairie was to recreate some of these pothole wetlands. So we did just that. We wanted to have a water source out there to increase the biodiversity of wetland plants and animal species. So it's quite simple. We dug a hole, we filled it with water, planted it. Not so simple. There's more process behind it than that. But this is what the pothole wetlands look like right now. There's actually two of them. They're 30-foot diameter circles. Okay, we've got some nice interpretive signage. Where's Amanda? Is Amanda here? Thank you for those awesome signs. This one actually is not hers. You've got another sign that I'm going to show here in a minute, but they're very similar. She's created the model for it all. But the interpretive signage is very important because that tells a story that we would tell when we're not there. So patients will wander up to these things, read the signage, and guess what? This is a wonderful positive distraction from the burdens of cancer care and treatment that's going on inside the hospital. And one can argue that's the reason why we have gardens in general in a hospital setting. It's to create that positive distraction. So I was out there the other day and I was walking and I saw a trash bag in the pothole wetland and I got a little closer and the trash bag moved. And I got a little closer and it moved again. And it wasn't a trash bag at all. It was this guy here. And this was great. This is exactly what we want to see with these types of small-scale ecological restorations. We would not have attracted this guy without the pothole wetland. Okay, so again, these wetlands increase the biodiversity, creates a positive distraction. It's a great opportunity to enhance public awareness, all right? Public awareness about the benefits of ecological restoration. And it represents a shift in perspective. I'm going to expand on that. So the biggest win with this little pothole wetland restoration project in the prairie, this pocket prairie, was that it was funded by garden clubs through grants. Very traditional garden clubs who, much like me, have shifted away from this conventional model of landscaping and relying on chemicals and imported plants to a more sustainable ecological approach to managing landforms. So this has been a great win. Okay, so the fourth component of rewilding is water conservation. I'm going to talk about a couple different ways that we do that at MD Anderson. They may not all be appropriate for your situation, but let's go through them. So number one, recover condensate. A lot of you guys that do not work in institutional environments may not be aware of this, but these large buildings are gigantic machines. They have huge air handlers on them. These air handlers generate a tremendous amount of condensation. It's kind of like your air conditioner at home dripping, but think of just a gusher. So we capture that now, and all of our new buildings has to have a condensate recovery system on there that we use to irrigate the landscapes. So I foresee a day where where we retrofit buildings and we're completely free of the city for the water. So reduce irrigation, low-hanging fruit here. We all overwater. I will point out this last bullet here. AgriLife has just put out some new research that shows watering at 60% of your watering budget, the required watering for your lawn, will still produce a convincingly green lawn. Okay, you have to put them side by side to really tell the difference. But 60%, a 40% reduction will produce a green lawn. Okay, retain water. Why not do this? This is our sister institution next door here. This is one of the LEED certified buildings, but those are rain collection barrels. Okay, so everything that rolls off the roof when it rains goes into these tanks, and this water is used to irrigate, flush toilets, and so forth. So that's where we're going. That's what I mean by retain water. There's another way to retain water that's not always apparent to people, but it's retaining water in the soil. So and we do this by increasing the organic matter in the soil. A 1% increase in soil organic matter will will increase your water retention capacity anywhere from 16,000 to 20,000 gallons per acre. So that's tremendous. Right now, we're looking at 1.5% organic matter in some of our soils. We're trying to get that up to 5. Okay. By the way, there's a tremendous amount of biology in there. And just a side fact, we heard this morning from David about all the biology that lives on us and in us. Well, a recent fact that I uncovered was that the biomass of all of the microorganisms that live in and on us weighs about 3 pounds, as much as our brain. So that's kind of unnerving there. Okay, another way that we conserve water that's not so obvious all the time is to utilize our stormwater. We've talked about stormwater already. That's what washes into our creeks and bayous and contaminates it. So that runoff from impervious surfaces often contains pollutants that adversely affect water quality. All right. So one way to mitigate that and use that stormwater before it enters the drain is to do things like create rain gardens. All right. So you guys are familiar with rain gardens. There's specs online from Texas AgriLife Extension. There's some great content out there. Okay. And here's what a rain garden looks like in cross section. It's basically a typical drain, but it's got this filtration layer of various types of media around it. Okay. Now, how many of you guys have heard of a French drain? Right? You know, as a landscaper, we would get calls by the dozens every day. You know, I need a French drain. I need a French drain. I need a French drain. Well, you know, that should be completely illegal. I think the goal of every drain from a property should be to have zero outfall on the other end before it hits the storm drains under a normal rain event. Okay, so stormwater wetlands. This is another way that we conserve water by using stormwater before it jets into the local watersheds here. So a stormwater wetland is when you convert a detention pond into a functional wetland, and there's a lot of benefits that go along with that. So here's what I'm talking about. You guys see detention ponds on the sides of buildings. A neighborhood or a school might have a gigantic detention pond. So what we've done is partnered with the Texas Coastal Watershed Program, and we sculpted and contoured these. Okay, they were specific or intentionally designed and sculpted. All right, we put a little weir in there, metal plate to back up the water, and we're not holding it indefinitely. We're just retaining it long enough to serve a function, which is to water aquatic vegetation or wetland plants. But it also will start to eventually provide habitat for wildlife. And here's a later picture. Now these are in the very early stages. Okay, so it's growing in right now and coming. It's still coming alive. Here's another one. Okay, but that's one way that we utilize the stormwater before it enters into the storm drains. Okay, yep, and there's a storm drain up there. Okay, here's Amanda's sign. Thank you. All right, so again, we're really big on the interpretive signage because it tells the story that we can't when we're not there. And it looks like I accidentally cut off part of that sign there, but it's a beautiful sign. It tells a story in 20 seconds what takes me 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears again and talk about the benefits of urban prairies because that's kind of what has spurred all of the sustainability and this new approach to land management was interacting with the Katy Prairie Conservancy on one of our first urban prairies. So the benefits, I'll just go through them. One is reduced impact maintenance. Okay, we all know this guy with the smoking lawnmower. So not only are we offsetting carbon emissions by not having these heavy commercial mowers out there all the time, we're saving. There's a huge economic benefit immediately with our urban prairies, and that's cost avoidance of maintenance. So typical turf grass gets mowed 43 times a year, and we have to pay a contractor to come out and do that, whereas a prairie site gets mowed just once, maybe twice a year, depending on how it looks. So there's a huge cost differential immediately. All right, so number two, the second benefit, and I could really talk about this all day long. This is a whole nother lecture all to itself, but stormwater filtration, this is a huge benefit of prairies, and I'm not going to say urban prairie here because it's prairies in general. So what you see here is a demonstration. There's 4 different substrates that you might find at MD Anderson. Concrete construction site, which is just soil. You see turf grass, and then you'll see the prairie and native grass. Long story short here, what I want you to see is the amount of runoff in the concrete roadway collection jar, okay? all the water that hit that road ran off, and it carried all the hydrocarbons, all that muck in the roadway, and it filled up that jar. And notice how dark green that is. Now go to the opposite end here. Oops. Go to the opposite end and look at the runoff in the prairie jar. There is virtually none, okay? A lot of that water is held in the surface area of the plants through adhesion in the soil column, adhering to the roots in the air spaces in the soil. But some of the water does come through. It's infiltrated. When the water percolates into the ground, we call that infiltration. But look at how much cleaner that water is from the runoff on the road. It's a lot clearer, okay? I wouldn't drink it, but, So this speaks volumes, okay? What if all of those bayous, all those contaminated bayous, were lined with prairie grasses? Or what if all those detention ponds, even our stormwater wetlands, were lined with prairie grasses, at least in certain parts of them? That would make a huge difference, I think. Okay, so number 3, the third benefit of our prairies is native plant propagation. We've talked about this already with the need to preserve the species from the Deer Park prairie, and we've expanded on that with the example that I gave you about with the chickadee and how many caterpillars it really takes to fledge those chicks from the nest. So that's really created an ecological imperative, not just for us, but really it should extend beyond the walls here today into our everyday lives about why we need to support or why we need to plant native plants, and that means encouraging nurseries to propagate them and grow them and so forth. I'd like to see native plants become a requirement in some of the building codes. I think that'd be pretty neat. So we've talked about wildlife habitat restoration and why viewing wildlife, especially invertebrates in a hospital, is a good sign of a healthy ecosystem. Okay. The 5th benefit is that urban prairies in the I hate to call it a technology, but the technique is used to demonstrate publicly and also to our facilities management groups about sustainability in general. So this is that prairie site, what it might look like 10 years from now. You can see that there's very little open green space left. We've got 2 new buildings scheduled. So by demonstrating this stuff now, we're hoping to get best management practices and incorporate a lot of these into the MD Anderson site of tomorrow. So the design charrette that we've heard about that's going to go on tomorrow is focusing specifically on this site here. Okay? So we demonstrate to our facilities management group these techniques, but it's also been a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate to the public. So we've had many different groups out there looking at these prairies. Texas Parks and Wildlife came out and they filmed a segment. I never saw that air. Did you ever see it air, Jaime? Did you? Yeah. Okay, I missed it. I thought they canned it because I'm such a stiff on camera, but okay. All right, it's an educational venue, so for patients, visitors, staff, and the general public. So there's lots of ways that we can connect people with nature by educating them on various components here. And I'll just kind of go through some slides here. This is a group of employees, all right? And here's more employees throwing seed balls. So when we get them to make seed balls and throw them, and now they're laughing and now they're talking to each other, and this really breaks down a lot of barriers, and all of a sudden, it's not a weed patch anymore, it's their prairie. They helped plant it. So it's been an interesting process. Of course, more interpretive signage. We have lots of interpretive signage out there. So if anyone wanders out on campus alone, you'll know what you're looking at. What I'm secretly doing with these signs is building the MD Anderson Garden Trail. I have to sneak it up on everyone, and one day I'm just going to unveil it and it'll be built. Okay, research and observation. This has been a kind of an unintended and surprising benefit or utilization of the prairie. So we have lots of student groups out here, and I see a couple in the back. They come out and they look at everything from insect diversity to soil biology. So it's been a great utilization of the prairie, and we're very proud to do that. Okay, rodent survey, that's kind of neat. One of the misconceptions that we get about our prairies is that, well, it's going to be a rodent habitat. How many rodents have we trapped out there? 0, to my knowledge. Okay. And lastly, the prairie, as I've been alluding to this entire time, just as with all gardens in hospital settings, are restorative destinations where patients can escape the chaos of the hospital, reduce stress, relieve muscle tension and anxiety, those things happen within just a few minutes of viewing nature. It's quite, it's almost magical. The gardens provide that positive distraction, and it encourages physical activity. It's not immediately adjacent to a building. You have to walk out there. Physical activity is a huge issue within the medical world and public health world. So anytime you can combine physical activity, walking, with the passive and restorative benefits of nature, you have a real synergy going on there. So we've had a lot of success with this first prairie that I've been talking about, to the degree that we were able to expand the concept around. This is our South Campus. We actually are working on almost 8 acres now of prairie restoration. Now, they're all in various stages of succession. They don't all look as good as that first one. But this is our South Campus. This is last summer here. And this used to be turf grass. We mowed it 43 times a year, and now we went down to once. So there's a huge economic savings there. But we also saw something else that we've never seen before in the entire time that I've been at MD Anderson out here. People. They came out it was just like the hill country. They came out and parked their cars and they took pictures, and it was really neat. And that's exactly what we want to see. All right. So that's it, and I don't know how we are on time. I'm going to be around for the rest of the day if you guys have any questions.
And tomorrow.
And tomorrow, yes. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right.